Hi everyone and welcome to Joe Glass Comics. I'm Joe Glass, comic book writer and creator behind series including The Pride, Acceptable Losses, Glitter Vipers, The Miracles and more to come. This episode is another episode of the Breaking Into Comics series where I'm going to tell you a bit about my journey breaking into comics, things which have helped me, things which I think could help you, particularly if you're a writer looking to get into comic books. And yeah, feel free to check out this episode and the whole series so far, which is in its own playlist on the channel. This week is networking, or rather part one of networking. I think really there's two very distinct parts of my networking journey and of networking as a whole, which I think could be beneficial to you. So I'm splitting things up across 2 weeks. There's probably going to be a little bit of a break in the Breaking Into Comics series, just so that then I can plan a few more episodes ahead, work out exactly what the next steps on the journey were, so that I can relate to you as best as I possibly can. As mentioned in the previous episode about Comic Cons, this aspect kind of took place around the same time of doing the first Comic Con show for Stiffs and the Pride way back when. And yeah, this is kind of something we did, which may have been at the first Comic Con, might have been a few months before. I've got to be honest, it's kind of fuzzy in my head. But yeah, it was kind of happening around the same time. So the first thing I would say with networking is important for not just meeting other creators in the medium who, it's beneficial for you to do that. You can get so many things out of that. I'm going to be going into the whys and way forwards. But also it's a chance to meet potential editors or publishers or people who could potentially give you the next gigs in the future. So if something you want to do is not just making your own comics and self-publishing them, but also like working with publishers and perhaps even other mediums, then yeah, I would say networking is perhaps the most important step on your journey of breaking into comics. For us, there were two major first steps in our networking, in terms of networking and breaking into comics on our journey. First step was we actually went to Thought Bubble. I can't remember which year it was, but the then comics talent manager or talent finder for Marvel Comics was making an appearance at Thought Bubble. This was, of course, the now editor-in-chief, C.B. Cebulski. What we did way back then was me, Gavin, and PJ, because Drew couldn't make it, went to Thought Bubble and we took an early draft of what would go on to become Stiffs. Now, I say go on to become because it was very different. At that time, the book was actually called Zombie Death Squad, and this was a few pages of what would be called Zombie Death Squad issue 0, which was to basically be like a prequel comic before the main series. Elements of that comic then were reused. But again, I'm jumping ahead. We went there with the pages which Gavin had drawn, based on a script which me and the boys had written, and which was actually coloured by myself. I can't remember who lettered it. We might have had a letterer do it. It definitely wasn't myself. It might have been Gavin. I really can't remember that far back, but someone had lettered it, or at least I think they had. It might have just been coloured pages that we had at the time. At any rate, CB was going to be doing portfolio reviews at Thought Bubble, and this was a crazy big opportunity we thought, so that was immediately something we did. So we went to Thought Bubble, we actually got to meet CB, and he was really gave praises for the book. He was very very positive about it. He, however, also gave constructive criticism. Now, here's something again which is useful and I think is important to take on board. There is such a thing as constructive criticism, and there's such a thing as just criticism. Plain criticism is not useful. It's not useful to anyone. You will find that there are heaps and heaps and heaps of internet comic personalities or comic videos or comic critics videos, particularly here on YouTube, where all they're doing is criticizing. They're not actually providing any kind of useful insight or constructive criticism. They're just criticizing because hate gets clicks. And unfortunately, that is the case on the internet and has been for decades. And it's a terrible shame and it's disgusting, but That is a long story and a big problem all of its own. You will find then that there will be heaps of people who are just looking at comics and just dissing them, and will seem to almost be like they don't actually like comics because they never talk about anything they do actually like. So you do kind of feel like, well, maybe you should stop reading. I don't know, maybe because, apparently all you do is hate them. Anyway, constructive criticism looks at something and doesn't just go, this is shit, or this is bad, or you're terrible and you should stop, or, screw you, slur for a gay person, you should burn in hell and die. That's something I've actually had. No, instead, constructive criticism can look at something which you've done and actually go like, well, hey, here's something which is maybe a bit of a fault and maybe should be explored, and perhaps even offer beneficial, useful hints and tips. To give an example, one of the elements that CB said we were failing was the colours on the story, and he argued that what I had been doing in the digital colouring, as I said, I was doing it myself, and I had never coloured anything before, was actually not going to turn out well in print. When it was printed, it would actually look really muddy, and the colours would actually look really bad as a result. We took this on board. I knew then that this was not going to be my forte, so that was when we decided we need to get an actual colourist, and that was when we sought out Chris Carter, who then became part of what would become Stiffs. And so that was ultimately constructive. CB didn't just look at it and go like, well, this is just crap. Or like, he didn't even go, well, the colours are crap. He said, look, the way the colours have been done, they won't print well. It was providing a criticism, which was pointing out that, yeah, okay, there's a flaw, but here's how this can be resolved, or this is something you should just think about, and, this is something which can be fixed. The important thing you should bear in mind when receiving such criticism or getting a pushback from an editor or publisher or anything like that is not a personal thing. That is not them saying that they think you're a terrible person, or that you're a terrible creator, or that you're bad at what you do, and that does not, absolutely does not give you the right to be crappy to them, nor does it give you the right to insult, harass, or harangue anyone. Unfortunately, there are people who have had that sort of experience where they have felt entitled to a position at a particular publisher, and when they got pushback from a particular editor or assistant or anything like that, have then decided to lead a harassment campaign against them. That is not the way to go about doing comics. Again, something I will sort of get into further and later in either this video or the next, the comics community is not that big, really, and we all talk. And that is an important aspect of why networking is important. Because if you are shitty, everyone will know. At any rate, this took us then back to the drawing board to realise that A, we need to get professional in on the colours, and that we need to rework some things. There were some story elements, I think, which CB also was suggesting, which made us rethink how we were going to do the story. In terms of the next part of networking, it was either at our first Comic-Con or possibly a Comic-Con slightly before it. We met up with ComX Comics, a British publishing group who did books such as Class War, The 45, and a few others, and they were like really great British independent comics filled with like these really amazing British creators like Rob Williams. And yeah, we became quite friendly with a bunch of them, from particularly like the editor-in-chief Eddie Dayton, the comics guys there, and like a few of them, they were at this Cardiff Comic Con, and we showed them Zombie Death Squad and all that we had at the time. And again, they were actually really awesome, really friendly, gave us some really fantastic advice, and were praising a lot of what we were doing, but also had constructive criticism to bring. And like one of the big things they said was like the name needs to change. They pointed out that we were coming out at a time when the Walking Dead TV show was about to air, and obviously the Walking Dead comic was still going, and it was at a time where zombie comics were a dime a dozen. And they said, if you've still got to have the zombies in the comic, putting it in the title is not going to be a good idea, because it's immediately going to make people think like, oh, there's 1,000 of these. This took us back to the drawing board in terms of names. We had various different kind of titles coming up through our heads, like Dead Enders was almost it for a while, and then we found out there was a Vertigo series by the same name. There was, I think, just Working Stiffs at one point. And then, we settled on Stiffs, and the series then came out as it was. We rejigged the story. Elements of the initial Zombie Death Squad issue 0 actually became a flashback in either this issue 2 or possibly 3, I can't quite remember. But yeah, like, so didn't everything we had done before didn't have to get thrown away, but it did mean that we were able to do a rethink and essentially create something better from it. And that's a big part of why networking is so important. You will learn so much. And that comes only from not only the doing and the making, but showing that to your peers. And yeah, sometimes people who are above you, further along in the industry. That is not to say that you should only be chasing after the big comic writer who's writing Batman right now, or the big publisher or editor at a massive multimedia corporation like Disney or something like that. You should be aiming to also network and get to know your colleagues and your peers who are on the same level as you at Comic-Cons and shows. Get to know your next door neighbor at the Comic-Con. Find out like their book and how they're doing, and like what kind of things they're making, how are they selling it, what kind of markets are they appealing to. These kind of things are important because you will learn so many lessons. Even if it's someone who is at the same level as you are, as subjective as that is, that person will have come at things in their own way. They will have learned things in a different way to you, or in a different order to you, or have mastered things which you haven't even begun to start to work out. So yeah, you should be completely networking and making friends with your colleagues. Because if you were really pursuing this as a career, these are your workmates and your best friends and your support group. They're going to be the ones to help you when you're struggling. They're going to be the ones to help you up when you fall. You need them, and they need you. And that's another thing. When you are networking and you are meeting these people, be prepared that people are going to ask you for advice at some point. Because like I say, you will possibly have mastered things before some other people have. So sometimes people will ask you for advice. Similarly, this is another good reason why you have to be a good person. I've actually been to a number of breaking into comics panels at Comic-Cons, and one thing which always bugged me, which sometimes came up from a certain publisher, was that you could be 2 or 3 things, but you had to be 2 or 3 things, and like you could either be nice, quick, or good. You could be quick and good, but a complete asshole in their minds, and they would still hire you because you were able to turn out a comic fast. Frankly, in my mind, that's got us to a big part of where the industry is now, which isn't helpful, and I think is something which we need to change. So that basically, if you are quick and you are really good, but you're a total asshole, then, you know, people are going to talk about that. And, you know, maybe you shouldn't be getting the gigs that you're getting, because there are people who are actually good people who deserve it more. Similarly, they had all the other combinations of those. You know, you could be a really nice person, and you could be really good, but you're not particularly quick, but that means they'd still hire you. But this idea was you have to be 2 of those 3 things. There's an element of that I can agree with, but for me, I would say you should definitely never be an asshole. Because if you are rude to people that you work with, if you are clearly only using your colleagues and peers, or even people sort of above you in the industry who are already getting like the big name jobs and things, for a leg up on the industry, or trying to get yourself work or something, that is going to get passed around. You are going to build yourself a reputation, and it is going to come back and bite you in the ass eventually. Instead, you should focus on being a good person, as helpful as you possibly can to your colleagues, and being kind, and that will actually come back to you in the end, and normally 1,000-fold. So absolutely network, meet people, show people your work, even if it's before you start exhibiting, but especially once you've started doing Comic-Cons and shows and started selling your books everywhere. Network and befriend all of those who are working alongside you, and be sure to get that advice from people whose advice and opinion you will respect. And if you get advice or an opinion which doesn't actually feel like what you wanted to hear, don't shut down and throw it away. It could be useful, but only if it's constructive. If someone is giving you advice or criticisms which are by no means constructive at all, You do not have to listen to them. You do not have to ever waste your time on that. Anyway, that's it for this quick entry in the Breaking Into Comics series. The next part will be the next part of networking, which will be actually jumping ahead a few years in our, or rather my particular comics breaking in story and path. So as I say, come back next time and I will update you on what happened next when we were breaking into comics. Thanks again for checking us out. See you soon.